Then they never deserved you at all.
I can't marry a man in a wheelchair. I won't let your condition humiliate me in front of my family. Those were the exact words Sierra Van Allen whispered to her billionaire fiancé, Elijah Maddox, just 30 minutes before their wedding. No yelling, no drama. Just ice-cold rejection delivered like a death sentence, right there in the cathedral's private lounge, as hundreds of guests waited outside. And just like that, the wedding of the year, the love story the media called Boston's Royal Union, collapsed into ash. Elijah Maddox, the sharp-minded tech genius who built a trillion-dollar AI empire from nothing, sat in silence, his tuxedo crisp, his wheelchair polished, his heart shattered. He didn't say a word as Sierra tossed her diamond ring onto the velvet cushion and walked out, leaving him to face the music alone. Photographers outside the stained glass doors had no idea yet, but the whispers spread fast. The bride had bailed. The groom was left, and worst of all, he was broken. Not just physically, but in every way a man could break and still breathe. But what no one saw coming was her. She wasn't on the guest list. She wasn't wearing a gown. She didn't arrive in a limo. She was there working, refilling champagne, carrying trays, invisible to everyone until she did the one thing no one else had the courage to do. Her name was Zariah Lane, 25, black, beautiful, eyes like midnight stars, a smile so warm it made winter jealous. The kind of woman that made people uncomfortable not because of who she was, but because of what she represented. Unapologetic strength in a world designed to silence women like her. That day, Zariah heard everything. She saw Elijah break, and when everyone else stepped back in shame or discomfort, she stepped forward with compassion, not pity. Not because she was trying to save anyone, but because kindness shouldn't be a luxury. What she did next would change both their lives forever. And if you think you know where this story is going, trust me, you don't. Because this isn't just about a broken groom or a courageous waitress. This is a black story about defiance, dignity, and choosing love when the world expects bitterness. And here, on Hidden Worth, we tell those stories, the ones most people scroll past, the ones that reveal what society overlooks, the value in people the world refuses to see. So, before we dive in, just do one thing. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another story like this. Because this one, it's going to stay with you. Let me tell you exactly what happened after the bride walked out, and the waitress walked in. Elijah Maddox wasn't just any man. At 34, he was a self-made billionaire, a prodigy of code and machine learning, the founder and CEO of Halcyon Systems, one of the most valuable tech companies in the country. He'd graced the covers of Forbes, Wired, and Time. His TED Talk on ethical AI had been viewed over 40 million times. He spoke with the quiet precision of a man who built systems from logic, but behind that calm exterior was a storm of ambition. What most people didn't know, what they conveniently ignored, was that Elijah had been in a wheelchair since he was 29. A skiing accident in Vail, one wrong turn, one missed signal, a spinal injury that changed everything in an instant. He lost function from the waist down. The media called it a setback. Investors called it a complication. But Elijah, he called it a shift in perspective. The truth? He worked harder after the accident, thought deeper, built stronger. But while the world clapped for his genius, few truly accepted his reality. Behind closed doors, boardrooms hesitated, partners questioned. Women stared with mixed admiration and discomfort. The wheelchair wasn't just metal and wheels, it was a silent symbol of judgment in a world addicted to appearances. Sierra Van Allen, his now ex-fiancée, had seemed different. She was the darling of East Coast society, daughter of a governor, Ivy League educated, beautiful in a curated magazine cover way, sleek, poised, camera ready. They met at a gala in D.C., and for a time, it seemed real. But as the wedding approached, Elijah noticed the change. Less touch, less warmth, more hesitation. And on that day, 30 minutes before the vows, her mask fell completely. But this story isn't about her. It's about the woman no one noticed until everything changed. Zariah Lane. She stood 5'7" in her service flats, mid-20s, warm brown skin, natural curls tucked into a neat bun beneath her catering cap. Her uniform was simple black slacks, white button-down, black apron, but she wore it with the kind of quiet dignity you couldn't teach. Her posture, her presence, her eyes, everything about her said, "I see more than you think." Born and raised in Camden, New Jersey, Zariah was no stranger to hard work. She'd been working double shifts since she was 16. Her mother, a former school bus driver, taught her early on that life wouldn't hand her anything she didn't fight for. Her father left before she could walk. Her brothers were in and out of trouble. But Zariah, she had a different fire in her. She wanted to study psychology, to understand people, to help people. But tuition costs stacked up like unpaid bills, and so she shelved her dreams for now and took whatever work she could get. Waitressing, catering, cleaning, anything legal that paid. And every time she walked into a room like Elijah's wedding, with high ceilings and crystal chandeliers, she felt it, that look. The one that said, "You don't belong here." Not just because she was serving drinks, not just because she wore cheap sneakers, but because she was black, because she smiled too confidently, because she dared to meet people's eyes when she refilled their champagne. That day at the Cathedral of St. James in Charleston, South Carolina, was no different. The moment Zariah stepped into the bridal suite with a tray of canapes, one of the bridesmaids giggled and muttered something under her breath. Something about the help. Another guest at the rehearsal dinner the night before had asked her where she was really from, then laughed when she said, "New Jersey." But Zariah had learned how to smile through it, how to keep her head high, how to serve with grace in a world that often confused kindness with servitude. What she hadn't expected that day was Elijah. She saw him before the ceremony, alone, sitting near the garden doors in silence, his hands clenched around the wheels of his chair, his face unreadable. She paused for a split second. Something in her gut told her the air had changed. And later, when the whispers started, when guests began looking at their phones, murmuring, pointing, speculating, she knew something big had gone wrong. She didn't go to him out of pity. She went because the world had a bad habit of turning away from pain, especially when that pain wore dark skin or sat on wheels. And Zariah Lane had never been one to look away. She was about to change Elijah's life, and he was about to change hers. But neither of them knew it yet. The first thing Zariah noticed was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but that kind of silence that sinks its teeth into a room, sharp and deliberate. It happened moments after Sierra walked out. One by one, the guests inside the cathedral began to catch on. Phones buzzed, texts spread, faces shifted, laughter died down. And soon, the whispers turned into murmurs, then into awkward, judgmental glances. No one said it out loud, but it was obvious. The bride had walked out on the groom. And the groom, well, he was in a wheelchair. Some guests tried to act concerned. Others made excuses. Maybe she got cold feet. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. But the truth was written on every smug face and pitying smile. They weren't surprised she left. They were surprised it had taken her this long. Zariah watched from the edge of the reception hall, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres that no one touched anymore. She saw it all the way, the bridesmaids huddled in the corner, giggling behind manicured hands. The way a group of older men from the Van Allen side muttered things like, "Should have known better," and "a man like that." It was only a matter of time. But what stung more than the gossip was the way people started avoiding Elijah altogether. They didn't approach him, didn't comfort him, didn't offer so much as a handshake. It was as if his wheelchair made him untouchable now, some tragic figure they couldn't bear to look at, let alone speak to. Zariah's chest tightened. Then came the second wave. This time, it was aimed at her. She had just set down an empty champagne glass on a tray when a woman in a designer gown brushed past her and muttered, "Try not to stare, sweetheart. You're not part of the show." Zariah blinked, stunned, unsure if she'd heard right. But the woman didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept walking like Zariah was a piece of scenery. Minutes later, another staff member, a server from the same catering company, sidled up beside her with a smirk. "Don't get any ideas," he whispered, nodding toward Elijah across the room. "You think he's gonna notice you? Girl, you're here to serve food, not fantasies." Zariah clenched her jaw. This wasn't new. She'd heard variations of those comments her whole life. Too confident for a waitress, too articulate for a girl from Camden, too dark to be anything more than background. And now, here in this hall of wealth and power, she was being reminded over and over that she didn't belong. Not because she lacked grace, not because she was unprofessional, but because she was black. Because she dared to look people in the eye. Because her mere presence disrupted the polished illusion they'd built for themselves. She saw it in their eyes, the discomfort, the calculation, the assumptions. And she saw it in the way they looked at Elijah too. Once the golden boy of American innovation, now reduced in their eyes to the man in the chair. Not just disabled, diminished. The same people who toasted his genius 6 months ago were now pitying him like a wounded animal. Zariah couldn't decide which was worse, the condescension aimed at her, or the isolation they wrapped around Elijah like a silent punishment. But she knew one thing for sure. She had spent her whole life proving people wrong, fighting past the labels, rising above the sneers. And in that moment, as she stood just feet away from a man the world had suddenly deemed unworthy, she recognized something in him. That quiet strength, that invisible pain, that refusal to let the world decide your worth. And while everyone else looked away, Zariah took a step forward. She wasn't going to let him sit in that silence alone. Not today. In that grand hall, the candles flickered, and the crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across polished marble floors. But those lights couldn't warm the cold air that had settled around Elijah Maddox. He sat near the back, wheelchair angled slightly away from the main congregation, hands resting in his lap. His face was pale, his eyes distant, and every muscle in his body seemed to ache with humiliation and sorrow. Zariah Lane watched him from across the room, tray in hand, her heart pounding like a war drum. She had rehearsed courage all her life, but this was different. It was fear mixed with purpose. The whispers behind her back, the cold stares toward him. The world's weight pressing down on both of them, somehow it all converged in this moment. Then it happened. A bridesmaid in a silver gown, overhearing a suspicious murmur, stepped close to Elijah's chair. Her voice dropped loud enough for Zariah to hear. "I can't believe she left him like that, in a wheelchair. So embarrassing." She shook her head and turned away, the group she came from giggling behind her. Elijah closed his eyes. The insult landed like a grenade. He gripped the wheels of his chair, as if bracing for another blow. Zariah's breath caught. She felt anger deep and scorching bubble up in her chest. She imagined how many times Elijah must have endured that reaction before, how many times people's pity or disgust had weighed on him like gravity. And she realized that right then, she had a choice: remain invisible or do something. Zariah set down her tray gently on a nearby table, smoothing its black tablecloth with the back of her hand. She took a step, then another. The chatter in the room dimmed just a little when she walked toward Elijah. Heads turned, glasses paused mid-air, assistants froze. The bridegroom in the wheelchair and the dark-skinned waitress were moving toward each other like two worlds colliding. She stopped when she was a few feet from him. Her chest heaved with a breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. For a moment, Elijah's eyes flickered open. He looked up, startled. "Are you okay?" she asked, voice soft but firm. No pity, no patronizing tone, just simple concern. Elijah blinked, assessing her. He must have expected no one to speak to him, not in that moment. "Yes," he said, voice thin. I'm managing." That word hung between them, managing, as if that were enough, as if that were all anyone could expect. Zariah shifted closer, careful not to invade his space, but close enough that he felt her presence. "You don't have to just manage," she said, quietly. "You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who meets you, who doesn't turn away." Elijah's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands. "You don't know me." His voice was quiet, brittle. "I might not," Zariah answered, "but I know what it is to be ignored, to be judged, to watch people treat you like less." She swallowed. "I see you, and that means something." Silence wrapped them. In that silence, the room seemed to pull back. The laughter had died. The whispers had dulled. Everyone was waiting to see what would come next. Then Zariah did the unthinkable. She reached for Elijah's hand. Her fingers brushed his knuckles. He froze. His eyes widened. She didn't pull away. She held on gently, respectfully. "Please don't sit here alone," she said. "You don't have to face their looks by yourself." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. A mother covering her child's ears, a photographer raising a camera. But Elijah remained still, muscles taut, as though torn between retreating or accepting. Minutes stretched on. In the larger silence, Zariah's hand rested on his. She looked straight at him, not at his wheelchair, not at his injury, but at his eyes. "You are not less because your body changed," she said. "You are not lesser because someone couldn't see your worth. The world is big enough for you and for someone like me." Elijah's throat moved. He swallowed. His voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. "Thank you." Zariah offered him a small, kind smile, the kind that doesn't demand anything. And then, deliberately, she leaned a little closer and said, "Let me sit with you." She lowered herself to a small ottoman nearby, not kneeling, not making it dramatic, but just sitting with dignity at his level. She placed her hand back on his, steady. He glanced at her, uncertain. "You don't have to," he said softly. "I want to," she replied. And just like that, she claimed that moment. She made it theirs. From somewhere in the crowd, a hush fell, a soft intake of breath. The guests looked away awkwardly or watched with a mixture of surprise and admiration. The bride's family froze. The photographers murmured. But the moment had shifted. Elijah listened to the soft echo of her words. Zariah ignored the stares. She focused on him. They remained like that for several long beats, two souls in collision, two lives intersecting at their most vulnerable. She didn't speak again immediately. She just sat beside him in solidarity, not pity. She didn't fake strength or bravery. She simply showed up. That turning point, that gesture of presence, of quiet alignment, lit something in him. Something deep, buried, but not gone. And in that silence, that gentle, courageous silence, a new story began. They sat in silence for a few moments longer, surrounded by 1,000 unsaid things. The music from the string quartet had faded long ago. The clinking of glasses, the shallow conversations, it all became background noise. All that remained was the odd pairing, the billionaire in a wheelchair, and the black waitress who chose to sit beside him. Zariah didn't rush to speak. She had learned, through a life of struggle and survival, that silence could be sacred, that sometimes presence was more powerful than words. But Elijah broke it first. "People keep staring," he said, his voice dry, almost detached. "Not sure if it's because I got left at the altar, or because you're sitting here." Zariah smirked, eyes still fixed forward. "Probably both." He looked at her, genuinely surprised by the honesty. "And you're okay with that?" he asked. Zariah shrugged. "I've had people stare at me my whole life. Doesn't mean I owe them an explanation." He chuckled quietly just once. It wasn't a laugh of joy, but it was something. A crack in the wall he had wrapped around himself. "I thought today would be different," he admitted. "I thought, for once, I wouldn't feel like a burden, like the guy everyone's secretly talking about." Zariah tilted her head, finally turning to look at him fully. "Can I be honest? Please. I think you scare them more now than you ever did before." He raised a brow. "Scare them?" She nodded. "You're not just powerful. You're proof that strength can survive even when the world tries to break it. You're not what they expected. You're not a headline. You're human. And that scares people who only know how to respect power, not pain." Elijah blinked slowly, as if weighing her words. Then, almost involuntarily, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled a full breath, one he'd been holding all day. "You talk like someone who's seen the dark side of things," he said. Zariah smiled faintly. "I have. Grew up in Camden. My mom worked 3 jobs. My brothers made mistakes. I was told, over and over again, that I'd never make it out. That I'd always be stuck pouring drinks for rich people who wouldn't even look me in the eye. And yet, here you are," Elijah said softly. "Yeah," she nodded. "And here you are." He glanced down at his lap, then at his wheelchair. Most people only see this now. Then most people are blind, she replied without hesitation. Because what I see is a man who built something from nothing, who walked through hell and still showed up. That doesn't disappear because of a chair. Their eyes met again, this time with more weight, more connection. A shared understanding formed between them, not born from pity, but from resilience. Why did you come talk to me? Elijah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zariah hesitated for a second. Because everyone else was walking away. He looked down, silent. And also, she continued, a little bolder now, because I saw you before she left. You were sitting by the garden doors, hands folded, looking out like you were already alone. And I recognized that look. I've worn it before. That struck something in him. He nodded slowly, his voice thick. It's a hard thing being invisible and judged at the same time. Zariah let out a soft laugh. Story of my life. They sat together a while longer, saying little, but feeling more. The air between them shifted, no longer heavy with embarrassment, but infused with something unspoken. Respect, comfort, curiosity. You know, Elijah said finally, most people would have walked right past me today. Hell, most did. But you sat down. Zariah looked over, her voice gentle. Sometimes, sitting down next to someone says more than standing up for them. He smiled, really smiled this time. Not forced, not performative. And what do you do when you're not rescuing abandoned grooms? He asked, a spark of playfulness in his tone. Zariah grinned. Mostly school, when I can afford it. Psych major, and a lot of serving tables to make it work. You want to be a therapist? Something like that. I want to help people understand themselves better, maybe help them heal. Elijah nodded, impressed. That's rare. So is someone like you listening to someone like me, she said, not as an accusation, but as a quiet truth. And he did listen, really listened. And in that moment, with the crowd still watching from a distance, the two of them created their own world. One where status and scars didn't matter, where broken hearts could find stillness, where unexpected conversations could become turning points. And neither of them realized it yet, but their lives had just changed forever. The music had long faded. The guests were scattering, some slowly making their way to the valet, others pretending to care as they hovered by the buffet, whispering into flutes of untouched champagne. The floral arch still stood at the altar, untouched, pristine like a lie frozen in time. The bride never returned. And yet, Elijah remained, still in his chair, still in his tailored suit, but something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just the man who had been left. He was a man who had been seen, truly seen for the first time that day. By someone no one else had even noticed. Zariah stood beside him now, her apron neatly folded over her arm, her curls loosened slightly from the tension of the day. She had no script for what came next, no plan. But her heart was louder than the silence in the room. You ready to leave? She asked gently, gesturing toward the side entrance, the one without photographers or questions. Elijah hesitated, then shook his head slowly. I think I want to walk through the front. Zariah looked at him for a moment, unsure if he was serious. The front of the cathedral was still full of people, curious eyes, judgmental stares, and enough whispers to fill a courtroom. That's a statement, she said. He met her gaze. So let's make one. She smiled, soft and knowing. Then, without asking for permission or waiting for applause, Zariah did the unthinkable. She took his hand, interlocked her fingers with his, and walked him down the aisle. Not as a guest, not as an assistant, but as an equal. The guests turned in slow motion. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads whipped around. Some gasped audibly. Others pulled out phones, unsure whether to film or simply stare. The billionaire groom and the black waitress. Hand in hand. Elijah kept his eyes forward, shoulders back. Zariah walked beside him, pace steady, heart pounding. Her skin prickled with every glance, every raised brow, every whispered word. But she didn't let go, and neither did he. They reached the center of the cathedral right where the altar stood, where flowers still drooped from golden vases. where a bouquet lay discarded at the edge of the platform. Zariah stopped. So did Elijah. He turned slightly in his chair, looked up at her. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed through the space like a challenge. "You saved me today." She laughed under her breath. "You're a billionaire genius. I think you'll manage." "No," he said seriously. "You reminded me I still matter, that I'm not just a headline or a pity case. You sat beside me when the world turned away. You didn't owe me that." Zariah looked down, blinking away the heat behind her eyes. "You didn't owe me anything either, but you listened." He gave a slow nod. Then, unexpectedly, Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. The ring. The same ring Sierra had thrown down hours earlier. Gasps echoed around the hall. Zariah froze. "What are you doing?" He didn't open the box. He simply held it in his lap, like a symbol of something that almost was but now meant something entirely different. "I'm not proposing," he said quickly, a half-smile tugging at his lips, "but I am reclaiming this moment. Not for Sierra, not for the press, for me." He turned to the crowd now, voice firmer. "For everyone who ever felt discarded, dismissed, unwanted, today doesn't belong to those who left. It belongs to those who stayed, to those who showed up, to those who had the courage to be kind when kindness wasn't convenient." Then he looked back at Zariah. "You changed the course of this day, and maybe more than that." Her breath caught. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight. She wasn't supposed to be part of this moment. But somehow, she was. And as they stood together, hand in hand in the middle of a space meant for people like them to feel small, they became something powerful, unignorable. Not because of a ring, or a title, or a headline, but because of what they had just done. Together. They turned and made their way to the front doors, now wide open. The sunlight poured in, golden and sharp, and when they stepped outside, they didn't look back. It started with a single tweet. Someone from the crowd had filmed it Zariah, walking hand in hand with Elijah Maddox down the cathedral aisle. No fancy filters, no background music, just raw, unfiltered reality. The caption read, "The billionaire groom was left at the altar, but look who stood by him. A waitress, a black queen. This is the real love story." Within hours, the video went viral. By midnight, it had over 8 million views. By morning, it was on every platform imaginable. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even TikTok. Major networks scrambled to cover the story. Hashtags trended. Number runaway bride. Number wheelchair warrior. Number waitress and the CEO. Number black story. Number hidden worth. Every headline had a different angle. Abandoned billionaire finds unexpected support from a waitress. When the bride left, she stayed. The woman who stood, by Elijah Maddox. From invisible to iconic, Zariah Lane becomes symbol of modern strength. People couldn't get enough. Some praised Zariah for her courage. Others speculated about Elijah's intentions. And of course, the vultures came out too. Talk show hosts debated whether it was real or a PR stunt. Gossip blogs dug into Zariah's background like she was a celebrity overnight. Single, waitress, lives in New Jersey, community college student, no criminal record, fiercely private. But the loudest noise wasn't about her resume. It was about her skin. The fact that she was black. That she wore natural curls and no designer labels. That she came from a working-class neighborhood. That she dared to stand next to wealth and not apologize for existing. Some praised her, called her a modern-day Cinderella. Others questioned her intentions. "Clout chaser," one commenter wrote. She saw a bag and went for it. Zariah didn't read the comments. She deleted her social media altogether by the second day. But the world didn't stop spinning just because she stepped out of the spotlight. At Halcyon Systems, the board called an emergency PR meeting. Elijah waved them off. "I don't care what the press says," he told them. "She's not a liability, she's a reminder." His voice didn't waver. And when a reporter caught him outside his downtown Boston apartment and asked if the rumors were true that he had found love in a waitress, he didn't dodge. He simply said, "She reminded me what love is supposed to look like. Not performance, not perfection, just presence." That clip alone racked up another 5 million views. But the backlash was real. Sierra Van Allen's family issued a cold statement. "We respect Elijah Maddox's privacy and wish him the best, but we stand by our daughter's decision to step away from the wedding." Translation? They didn't regret anything, least of all the humiliation they helped cause. And Zariah? She went back to work, quietly, at a small Italian bistro where no one recognized her, at least not at first. But even there, the storm followed. Customers would whisper. One left a note on a napkin. "Thank you for showing my daughter what courage looks like." Another slipped her a $100 tip folded inside a copy of the newspaper. The headline read, "The Waitress Who Changed the Narrative." And then, one day, a woman about Zariah's age approached her after work. She had tears in her eyes. "My brother's in a wheelchair," she said. "No one visits him anymore. But after seeing what you did, I did. Thank you." Zariah didn't know how to respond, not because she didn't care, but because she hadn't done any of it for recognition. She did it because it was the right thing to do. But what she didn't expect was this: the way Elijah kept showing up. He called. Not every day, just enough. Sometimes it was about something random, a song he thought she might like, a book he'd read in college. Other times it was quiet, just, "How are you?" He wasn't trying to impress her, and she wasn't trying to win him. But they talked, they listened, and slowly, the noise outside started to feel quieter. The media would keep spinning, the internet would keep shouting. But in the middle of all the headlines, two people were building something real, something honest, something no one could film or post or trend. Not a fairy tale, just the beginning of something unexpected. The noise eventually faded. The articles moved on. The hashtags were replaced. The internet found new scandals to obsess over. But for Zariah and Elijah, what remained was something rare, something real. It didn't happen overnight. There was no grand announcement, no Instagram post declaring their status, just a quiet, slow unfolding of trust. It started with coffee. Elijah invited her to a small, local cafe. No paparazzi, no security detail. Just two people trying to figure out how to talk when the cameras weren't watching. He rolled up in his custom-designed SUV, opened the passenger door himself, and greeted her with the kind of smile that didn't need to sell anything. Zariah showed up in jeans and sneakers, no makeup, no pretense. They talked for 2 hours, about everything and nothing. Family, loss, books, her love of 90 seconds R&B, his obsession with chess. The moment she realized she wanted to study human behavior. The moment he realized money didn't buy healing. They laughed. They disagreed. They paused when it got too personal and picked up again when it felt safe. Then came more moments. A late-night walk through the public garden, him wheeling beside her, her holding a hot chocolate, both wrapped in layers against the Boston chill. A weekend road trip to the Berkshires, where Elijah booked a wheelchair-accessible cabin and insisted Zariah pick the playlist. And eventually, one cold Tuesday evening, Elijah asked the question that had been lingering between them for weeks. What if we stopped pretending this isn't something? Zariah looked at him, her breath forming clouds in the air. "You sure you want that kind of attention again?" she asked softly. "The world has a habit of tearing people like us apart." "I'm not worried about the world," he replied. "I'm worried about wasting something good because I was too scared to try." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. That was enough. From there, life began to shape itself around something new. Zariah didn't quit her job, not right away. She finished her semester, still waiting tables on weekends. Elijah never asked her to stop. He respected her grind, admired it. He even showed up once during her shift, no fanfare, no entourage, just to sit quietly in the corner and watch her do her thing. "You light up a room when you work," he told her later. "I don't think you even notice it." She blushed. That's because no one's ever said it before. He did now, and often. She, in turn, pushed him in ways no one else dared to. When Elijah hesitated to attend an industry gala because of the whispers, Zariah was the one who reminded him that power didn't come from standing, it came from showing up, exactly as you are. So he did. With her beside him. and the headlines didn't matter anymore. Because in rooms filled with sharks in suits, he had someone who saw his soul, not just his resume. They weren't perfect. There were moments of doubt, triggers, old wounds reopened. Sometimes Elijah struggled with feeling dependent. Sometimes Zariah felt the weight of everyone's gaze on her, especially when people mistook her presence for a phase. But they talked, they stayed. And when Zariah was accepted into a master's program in New York, Elijah didn't flinch. "Go," he said. "I'll visit. We'll figure it out." She stared at him, tears in her eyes. "You're not afraid I'll change?" He smiled. "I hope you do. I just hope I'm lucky enough to grow with you." And he meant it. Because what they had wasn't built on fantasy, it was built on presence, on showing up when it mattered most, on small acts of love in a loud world. And so, while the world moved on, while timelines refreshed and stories faded, Zariah and Elijah were busy writing a different kind of story. Not for clicks, not for headlines, but for each other. Quiet, steady, true. It wasn't a grand moment. There were no fireworks, no orchestras swelling in the background. The seed of love between Zariah and Elijah didn't bloom in some dramatic scene. It grew in the quiet. It grew in the way she waited for him to finish a sentence, never rushing him, even when he paused to find the right word. It grew in the way he watched her hands when she talked, like they were painting stories in the air. Love started showing itself in tiny details. Like the day Elijah sent her flowers, not roses or something cliché. He sent her sunflowers, her favorite, because she once mentioned, in passing, that they reminded her of home. Or the time Zariah surprised him with a pair of vintage jazz records because he had told her, offhandedly, that his late father used to play them on Sunday mornings. Elijah didn't say much when he opened the gift, but his silence spoke volumes. And Zariah didn't need a thank you, his eyes said enough. They were still learning each other, still discovering the edges and curves of each other's hearts. But there was a rhythm forming, steady, honest, imperfect. Zariah loved how Elijah never tried to fix things when she vented about microaggressions at work or the stares she got while walking beside him. He didn't try to play savior. He listened. He asked questions. And when she needed space, he gave it. Elijah loved how Zariah didn't treat his wheelchair like a topic to avoid. She asked about his routines. She made jokes, gentle ones that reminded him he wasn't fragile. She called out places that weren't accessible and took mental notes about where he felt most comfortable. Not out of obligation, but out of care. And somewhere along the way, they stopped pretending they weren't falling. It hit Zariah first. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and sunny. They were in the park. Elijah had brought coffee, and she had brought her notebook, half poems, half dreams. He asked her to read one. She hesitated, then gave in. It was a short piece, something about being seen in a world that prefers silence. Elijah didn't interrupt. He didn't compliment her writing just to be nice. He sat there, eyes locked on hers, until she finished. And then he whispered, "That's the most honest thing I've ever heard." She felt it then, the warmth in her chest, the kind that doesn't come from flattery, but from being understood. For Elijah, it happened one night after Zariah had a long shift and came over late, exhausted. She didn't talk much, just curled up on the couch beside him. He made her tea, no big talk, no deep conversation. But as they sat there, the news humming softly in the background, Zariah reached over, without looking, and rested her hand on his leg above where he could feel anything. He watched her fingers settle there, gently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And something cracked open. She wasn't pretending the chair wasn't there. She wasn't pretending to understand it all. She just stayed. They didn't label it. There was no "are we official" moment, just a series of shared mornings and late-night phone calls, quiet dinners and long walks, slow dances in kitchens, and knowing glances across crowded rooms. Their love was slow burning, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that builds and lasts. And the beauty of it? They built it in the open. Yes, there were stares. Yes, there were questions. Yes, people still whispered. But neither of them flinched anymore. Because love like theirs didn't need validation. It just needed two people brave enough to show up. Over and over again. And they did. In every small, meaningful way. What started as a conversation beside a broken altar had grown into something real, something rare. A seed, planted in the most unlikely of places, now taking root. Now beginning to bloom. Every love story eventually meets a crossroad. For Zariah and Elijah, it came quietly, not with a dramatic betrayal or storming out of rooms, but in the slow build of pressure from a world that never stopped watching. The whispers that once faded, returned, louder, sharper, now wrapped in polite concern or well-meaning judgment. It started with Elijah's board of directors. Halcyon Systems was preparing to launch a new product, one that would position the company at the forefront of AI innovation. Investors were watching closely, stocks were sensitive, and the narrative around Elijah, once inspiring, was now deemed unpredictable by certain stakeholders. "She's a distraction," one board member said in a private meeting. "Her background, the media, the social commentary, it's not the image we want before launch." Elijah sat there, jaw clenched, hands folded. "Zariah is not a distraction. She's my partner. And if our company's image depends on pretending I'm not human, maybe we have bigger problems." Still, the pressure mounted. Elijah tried to shield her from it, but Zariah wasn't blind. She saw the shift in tone from his PR team, the subtle changes in how the media began portraying their relationship as a novelty, as temporary, as interesting. She saw the headlines, subtly suggesting she was holding him back. She noticed the invites that stopped coming, the photographers who cropped her out. Then came the offer. A well-known nonprofit offered Zariah a full scholarship to finish her master's degree at Columbia with a catch. The scholarship was partially funded by one of Halcyon's silent investors. And when she dug a little deeper, she found that it was more than just generosity, it was strategic distancing. If she takes it, a leaked email said, we regain control of the narrative, everyone wins. Zariah sat with the offer for 3 days. She didn't tell Elijah, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she needed space to think. Late one evening, she found herself standing on Elijah's rooftop garden, staring out at the Boston skyline. The air was cool, the city alive beneath her. Elijah joined her in silence, his wheelchair rolling over the stone path like a whisper. "You've been quiet," he said. She nodded. "A lot on my mind." He didn't push. So she turned, looked him dead in the eyes, and said, "If I leave, if I take this scholarship and go to New York, would you think I'm walking away?" Elijah blinked. "Are you?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "It feels like everything around us is trying to pull us apart, and I don't want to become a symbol instead of a person. I don't want our love to be a headline. I just want it to be ours." He sat with that, then asked, "And if you stay, what do you think happens?" Zariah laughed, bitter and low. "I become the CEO's girlfriend forever. No matter what I achieve, people will think I got it through you. They'll never see me as mine." Elijah's face changed, not with anger but with realization. "I never wanted that for you," he said quietly. "I never want to be the reason you shrink." "Then don't be," she whispered. And there it was, the real test. Not a betrayal of trust, but a test of vision. Could they love each other and still chase their separate dreams? Could their bond survive the space, the distance, the voices telling them they were too different? Elijah rolled closer. "Take the scholarship, Zariah." Her breath caught. "What?" "You've earned it. You belong in that program. You belong in every room you want to be in, and not because of me. You're not mine to keep. You're mine to support." Tears welled in her eyes. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "We'll figure it out. I believe in us more than I believe in control." She leaned down and kissed his forehead, resting there for a moment, her hand on the back of his neck. "I believe in us too," she whispered. And just like that, the decision was made. Not to walk away, but to walk forward. Separately, for now, but still together. Because real love isn't about possession. It's about growth. And in that rooftop silence, as the wind danced around them, Zariah and Elijah passed their first true test. Not with perfection, but with grace. The morning Zariah left Boston, the sky was the color of steel, gray, heavy, undecided. Her suitcase was light. Not because she didn't care what she packed, but because she didn't need much. A few favorite books, 2 framed photos, her notebook, a worn hoodie Elijah had once loaned her on a cold walk home, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. He insisted on driving her to South Station. Zariah didn't argue. She knew it was more for him than for her. The car ride was quiet, but not uncomfortable. They both sat in the stillness, like people who knew that sometimes words only cheapen a moment. It wasn't a goodbye of anger or heartbreak. It was the goodbye of 2 people who had chosen to respect the season they were in, even if it meant moving through it separately. When they arrived, Elijah turned off the ignition but didn't move. Zariah didn't either. "You okay?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. She nodded, nervous, excited, ready, scared. "All at once?" She laughed softly. "Yeah, all at once." He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. "You don't owe me anything, but I just want you to know. I meant everything I said. I'm proud of you. And I love you." Zariah swallowed. Her heart did that thing tight and soft all at once. "I know," she said, "and I love you too. That's why I have to go." He smiled gently, but his eyes were heavy. She leaned in, kissed him, not desperate or possessive, but deep, grounding. The kind of kiss you remember when the world gets too loud. And then, without drawing it out, Zariah stepped out of the car, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the station. She didn't look back. Because if she did, she wasn't sure she could go through with it. Inside the train, Zariah found her seat, slid in, and stared out the window as Boston slowly slipped behind her. The city that had challenged her, hurt her, changed her, gifted her love. It all looked smaller now. She pulled out her notebook and began to write. Not about Elijah, not about the headlines, but about herself. For once, the story was hers. The first weeks in New York were hard. The city didn't slow down for anyone. Her classes were intense. Her classmates, while brilliant, often looked at her like she didn't belong. But Zariah knew better. She had already survived being underestimated. She wasn't here to prove herself. She was here to become who she was always meant to be. Still, at night, she missed him. Missed the sound of his voice when he got excited about a new project. Missed the way he paused when thinking, then smiled like he cracked a secret only he understood. Missed the way he saw her without trying to mold or fix her. They texted, sometimes, quick check-ins, encouraging words. But they had agreed to give each other space, to live fully in their own lanes. And yet, one night, after a brutal day of classes, Zariah got home to a package waiting by her door. No label. Just her name, in handwriting she knew by heart. Inside was a single object, a chess piece. The Queen. Alongside it, a note. Every time I look at this piece, I think of how it moves not in a straight line, not like everyone else, but in power, in freedom, in all directions. That's you. Keep moving, Z. She sat on her floor, holding that tiny wooden queen in her palm, and cried. Not from sadness. From being seen, again. Weeks passed. She found her rhythm. She made new friends. She gave presentations that made professors stop and take notice. She started volunteering at a local youth center, helping teens navigate trauma with grace and empathy. She was building something. Not as Elijah's girlfriend. Not as the waitress from the wedding. But as Zariah Lane. And that, more than anything, was what he had wanted for her. Still, some nights, she wondered what he was doing. If he still wheeled through the city with that quiet confidence. If he ever sat by the window, thinking of her. She never texted. Because the last thing she wanted was to pull him back too soon. This part of the journey had to be walked alone. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. But beneath that ache was something stronger. Hope. Not the fragile kind that fades with distance. The steady kind that waits. It had been 3 months. 3 full months since Zariah stepped onto that train and rode toward a future she wasn't sure she was ready for but knew she deserved. In that time, Elijah had thrown himself into work. Halcyon's launch was a success. The AI product exceeded every investor expectation. Stock prices soared. His name was back in the headlines, but this time for innovation, not heartbreak. He should have felt triumphant. But something was missing. He still checked her Instagram, even though she hadn't posted in weeks. He still reread her texts, still found himself listening to old voicemails when nights felt too long. She was gone. Not just physically, but purposefully. She hadn't asked him to wait, and he hadn't asked her to come back. They were both too proud for that, and maybe too scared. But one Thursday night, after another award ceremony where he gave another speech that felt hollow, Elijah rolled into his penthouse, tossed his jacket onto the couch, and sat in the quiet. He was surrounded by success, but he felt alone. And then, something snapped. Not in anger, in clarity. He grabbed his phone and opened his notes app. He began to type. Not a long letter. Not a plea. Just a message. You once told me that sitting beside someone means more than standing up for them. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I miss sitting beside you. Let me show up. If you'll let me. He stared at it. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He hit send. Zariah was walking home from the youth center when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and stopped in her tracks. Elijah. Her heart skipped. Not because she hadn't thought about him, but because she thought he had finally moved on. She opened the message and read it slowly. Twice. Then stood there, in the middle of a Brooklyn sidewalk, unsure what to feel. He wasn't asking her to leave her life. He was asking to be part of it. That changed everything. The next day, she boarded a train. Not to run back, but to walk forward. Elijah didn't know she was coming. He was in the middle of a video call with a tech journalist when his doorman buzzed the intercom. There's a visitor here for you, Mr. Maddox. She says her name is Zariah. His breath caught. He ended the call mid-sentence, rolled out of his office, and moved toward the elevator like a man chasing air. When the doors opened, there she was. Same eyes. Same smile. Same presence that used to calm him in a storm. Hi, she said. He blinked. You're here. I am, she replied. Because you finally said something real. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Zariah stepped closer, pulled something from her bag. The chess queen he had sent her. I kept it, she said. But I don't want to just be a piece in your story. I want to help write it. He nodded slowly. I never wanted you to be anything less than the whole board. She smiled. And then, without needing permission, she walked into his space again. Not as a guest. Not as a memory. But as someone who had come home on her own terms. That night, they didn't make big promises. They ordered takeout, watched a movie halfway through, talked about nothing for hours. But when he reached for her hand and she didn't pull away, Elijah knew. This wasn't a reset. This was the biggest move either of them had made. Not toward each other, but toward something new together. Because real love doesn't always look like fireworks or fairy tales. Sometimes, it looks like showing up again and again, until silence becomes safety. And two people find their rhythm, not in perfection, but in presence. It wasn't a diamond ring or a down-on-one-knee moment. It happened one Sunday morning over pancakes and black coffee in Elijah's kitchen. Zariah was barefoot, dancing to a Nina Simone track playing softly in the background. Elijah was at the table, watching her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. You ever think about getting married again? She asked casually, spinning around with a spatula in hand. Elijah tilted his head. You mean, like hypothetically, or are you asking me? Zariah grinned. Maybe both. He didn't blink. Only if it's with you. She raised an eyebrow. That easy, huh? Zariah, I'd marry you in a Waffle House parking lot if it meant I could call you mine for the rest of my life. She burst out laughing, dropped the spatula, and walked over to him. Okay then, she said, placing her hands on his shoulders, but no parking lots. Deal? Deal, he smiled, pulling her gently into his lap. That was their proposal. No grand gesture, no audience, just pancakes, music, and the kind of quiet love that doesn't need to be loud to be real. They decided to do things their way. No guest list. No designer gowns or rented castles. No seating charts or media coverage. Just them. Elijah suggested a cabin he had once stayed at in the Adirondacks. It was quiet, surrounded by pine trees, and overlooked a lake that reflected the sky like glass. Zariah agreed instantly. 2 weeks later, they packed a weekend bag, loaded up his accessible SUV, and drove north, windows down, music playing, laughter filling the air like a road trip anthem. The ceremony was simple. Elijah wore a black shirt and slacks. Zariah wore an off-white sundress she found in a small boutique near her campus. No veil, no heels, just a single sunflower in her hair. They stood beside the lake as the sun began to dip low behind the tree line, casting gold across the water. A retired judge from the nearby town officiated. He didn't ask for rehearsals. He didn't stumble over Elijah's last name. He just smiled and said, "Say what's true, say what matters." Zariah went first. "I don't need a perfect life," she said, voice steady. "I just need you in it. You showed me what it means to be chosen, not saved. You never asked me to change. You just made space for me to be more of who I am. And with you, I want to keep growing." Elijah followed, his hand trembling slightly in hers. "You didn't walk into my life. You stayed when everyone else walked out. I fell in love with your courage, your truth, your laugh, your stubbornness, and that terrible cup of diner coffee you somehow love. You made me believe I still had something to offer this world. I want to build every day with you." They exchanged simple gold bands. No diamonds, no fireworks, just vows whispered into a pine-scented wind, with birdsong in the distance and lake water lapping gently at the shore. After the ceremony, they sat on the cabin's porch, wrapped in a single blanket, sipping wine and watching the stars slowly come alive. No cameras, no press, no trending hashtags. Just them. Zariah leaned her head on his shoulder and whispered, "We did it. Our way." He kissed the top of her head. Exactly how it was supposed to be. And in that quiet, tucked-away corner of the world, two souls who had been through enough storms found something better than perfection. Peace. It wasn't the wedding the world expected from a billionaire CEO. And it wasn't the fairy tale people imagined for the girl once called just a waitress. But it was theirs. And it was perfect. Because when love is real, it doesn't need an audience. It just needs two hearts brave enough to keep choosing each other, over and over again. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of wind chimes dancing outside the kitchen window. It sat on a hill just outside Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by tall trees, with a garden Zariah had built from scratch and a wraparound porch Elijah had designed himself. It wasn't massive, not some billionaire's palace, but it was home. 5 years had passed. Zariah Lane was now Dr. Zariah Lane Maddox, having earned her doctorate in behavioral psychology. She worked part-time at a local university and spent the rest of her time leading a non-profit that focused on emotional health for underserved youth. Elijah had stepped away from daily operations at Halcyon. He still sat on the board, still consulted, but these days, his schedule was mostly filled with passion projects, like adaptive technology for people with physical disabilities, and building accessible public spaces, parks, schools, libraries. They worked hard, but they lived slow. The mornings were for coffee and journaling on the porch. Afternoons often meant long walks, Elijah in his chair, Zariah beside him, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes just walking in rhythm. They had a daughter now. Her name was Simone, 3 years old, curious, stubborn, brilliant. She had her mother's eyes and her father's quiet intensity. She loved books, and bugs, and asking questions no one could answer. And she adored her parents. Zariah had once worried the world wouldn't make space for her family, that a biracial, interabled couple raising a child outside the spotlight would always feel like outsiders. But they had made space, by building it themselves. One afternoon, while playing in the garden, Simone pointed at the gold band on Zariah's finger. "Is that your princess ring, Mama?" Zariah smiled. "Sort of. It's the ring Daddy gave me when he promised to be my partner." Simone thought for a moment. "Do you need a ring to love somebody?" Zariah laughed gently. "No, baby. You just need to show up, every day. That's the real magic. Inside the house, Elijah sat by the open window, listening. His fingers were tapping on his laptop, writing a speech he would deliver to a room full of tech leaders next month. But his eyes drifted toward the sound of Zariah and Simone's voices. He still remembered the day he met her. How she sat beside him at his lowest moment. How she didn't pity him, didn't flinch, didn't look away. She just saw him. And in doing that, she had given him the courage to see himself again. Now, 5 years later, their life wasn't flashy or perfect, but it was full of laughter, of purpose, of grace. Sometimes, when the world felt too loud, Elijah would wheel out to the porch, Zariah would join him with tea, and they would sit in silence, watching the sky shift colors over the trees. They didn't talk about the headlines anymore. They didn't need to, because their love had never been about proving anyone wrong. It had always been about choosing each other again and again through every season. And that, they had learned, was what real love looked like. Not the kind written for cameras or wrapped in fairy tales, but the kind built from presence, from pain turned into purpose, from strangers to soulmates. One quiet, radical choice at a time. In a world that praises perfection, Elijah and Zariah's story is a gentle but powerful reminder. Real love doesn't need to be flawless. It just needs to be faithful. They weren't supposed to make sense. A billionaire in a wheelchair, left at the altar. A young black waitress, overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed because of her skin. Two people from opposite worlds, brought together by a moment that could have easily broken them both. But instead of breaking, they built. Piece by piece, day by day. Because love like theirs isn't about grand declarations, it's about everyday choices. Showing up, listening, growing, believing, even when the world tries to convince you not to. Zariah was never a side character in Elijah's story. She wasn't his charity case. She was the heartbeat he didn't know he needed. The mirror he was afraid to face. The strength wrapped in softness. And the fire that quietly said, "You are more than what they see." And Elijah? He was more than his bank account, more than the chair he sat in, more than the man the media tried to define. He was a reminder that vulnerability is strength, that presence is power, and that even when life doesn't go as planned, something beautiful can still rise from the ashes. Their journey wasn't about escaping reality. It was about embracing it with open hands, open hearts, and the courage to choose love over fear. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. To stop waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect partner, the perfect version of ourselves. To stop measuring our worth by how others see us. And to start living boldly, even if it means loving differently. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones no one expected. The ones that start with heartbreak and end in healing. The ones where the real happily ever after isn't about castles or cameras, but about connection. So maybe today's not just another story. Maybe it's a mirror. Maybe it's a reminder that your story isn't over yet. That who you are, as you are, is already enough. And maybe, just maybe, the person who'll truly see you is closer than you think. You just have to be brave enough to stay when it's easier to walk away. And if this story moved you, reminded you of your own hidden worth, or made you believe a little more in love again, take a second to share it. Subscribe to Hidden Worth for more stories that lift voices too often silenced and reveal the strength in every scar. Because every life holds value. Every soul carries worth. And some of the greatest love stories? They begin when no one's watching.